So last time we spoke, I mentioned that I'd be playing at the bike for the next vlog. Well, as you guys can see, this isn't quite Los Angeles. In fact, it's not even close. For those of you who've been subscribed for at least a few months, you could probably take one good guess as to where I am right now. Right, so Rancho Mirage Agua Caliente, which is this big building back here. And I think it's the only big building for like 4,000 miles or so. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. But anyway, before we get into today's session, which is actually gonna be a Deep Stack 2.5 game, they have a 2,000 max. How cool is that, huh? I have a couple of quick announcements. Number one is that I've played 7 times this month so far, and I've won 7 times. Pretty incredible. None of the wins have been that big, nothing to write home about, but I'll take 7 wins nonetheless anytime. Hopefully today we can keep that win streak alive, and if not, hey, at least it'll make for some good content. But more importantly, next week I'll be at the Lodge again in Austin, Texas. But anyway, that's gonna be the next vlog, so next time I'm speaking to you guys, it'll be from Austin and not 100 degrees California. Hopefully the weather is a little more forgiving over there in Texas, because it seems that the Southern California summer is finally upon us. All the more reason to get inside and play some cards, I think. So let's go do that. So bad news is I'm 6th on the list and there's only one table of 2.5, so who knows how long that wait will be. But good news is that they no longer require face mask and plexiglass in this casino. So this will be my first time in like over a year playing live poker without being required to wear a mask. Without getting too controversial, I gotta admit it feels pretty nice. Alright guys, underway here at Agua, playing some 2.5 no limit. I decided to buy in for $2,000, and the first noteworthy hand of the night actually came from the very first shuffle, where I looked down at pocket 10s on the button. We see an under the gun open to $20, and I elect to raise it up to $70 before the action gets back to him and he decides to make the call. So heads up in a re-raised pot to a flop of Jack 9-3, all different suits. He checks it over to me, and I think on this flop I'm happy to mostly bet small, so I elect to bet $50, and my opponent makes the call. Given that I bet pretty small, I expect him to call with a wide selection of hands, so when the turn comes to 9 of diamonds and he checks it over to me, I think I'm going to check it back, but most likely call any reasonable sized bet on the river, which comes down to 5 of spades. Now my opponent does decide to take the lead in the hand and place a bet of $120. Not much of a decision, at least in my opinion, especially given that we're only facing a half pot sized bet. Don't really have to be correct too often here to make this call profitable, so I make the call, and my opponent says good call as he flips over ace-10 of spades. So the first pot of the night is going our way. As I'm racking up the chips from that first hand, in the very next shuffle I get dealt pocket 9s, so picking up some playable hands here right off the bat. This time there's 2 limpers before I raise it up to $25, and both of the limpers make the call. So 3 ways in position to a flop of King 8-7 rainbow. Action checks to me once again, and even though the situation looks a lot like the last hand, a couple of key differences are that this is not a re-raised pot, and there's also 2 other players in the hand as opposed to just 1. So for those reasons, I decide to check it back, and we see a 4 of spades on the turn. Once again, both players check the action over to me. Now I think it's most likely I've got the best hand and can probably use some protection as well as get some value from draws or maybe worse pairs. So I elect to bet $25, and both of my opponents make the call. River is the 5 of spades, which introduces a possible flush as well as a straight for anyone holding a 6. So when the action checks to me for a third time, pretty unlikely that we're going to get value from worse now, so I'm happy to check it back and perhaps win this hand. And it looks like that's going to be the case because the first player doesn't seem to want to show. Then the second player shows ace-4 for just a pair of 4s. I flip over the 9s, and sure enough, 9s are good. So second one going our way. In the next hand, there's 4 limpers, and I look down at ace-4 of spades in the small blind. I decide to complete, and the big blind checks. So multi-way to a flop of king, queen, 8 with 2 spades. I elect to check this one, and the action gets to a late position player who decides to put in a $20 bet. Could raise here sometimes, but I elect to proceed with just a flat call this time, and everyone else folds. Heads up to a turn, which is the 4 of hearts. I check it to him once again, and this time he bets $60. The main problem at this point is that he's only got around $100 behind, so it's not really like a bluff here is going to get through. I guess folding wouldn't be the end of the world, but I'm not really in the mood for that, so I decided to just call and see if we can improve on the river, which unfortunately is not the case. It's the king of diamonds pairing the board and not really changing much at all. So once again I check it over to him, and this time he decides to bet his remaining $105. Ace-4 of spades is one of the worst possible hands to call here with, but at the same time he's not really representing too much aside from trip kings. So of course I make the call, and that's what he's got. King 3. Now you might be wondering, isn't that a pretty terrible call? Yes, absolutely. Let's move on to the next hand where the straddle is on. There's 3 limpers, and I complete in the big blind with 9-6 of hearts. Straddler checks it, so 5 ways to a flop of 8-4 deuce, all hearts. It's like the poker gods didn't want to see me butcher another hand, so they just gave me a really easy one to play. I bet $30 here, not really a fan of slow playing big hands. The straddler makes the call, and the under the gun limper also makes the call. So 3 ways here to a turn card, which is the jack of clubs. Shouldn't change too much, and I see no reason to stop betting, so I throw out $100. And this time the straddler on my left decides 100 is not quite enough. Let's play a bigger pot. He's all in for $350. Player on his left makes the fold, and now the action's back to me. Very straightforward call here, so that's what I do. We're off to see a river, which is the deuce of diamonds. Pairing the board, not really my favorite card, seeing as he could have a lot of 2-pair combinations, which it turns out he did. But it's jack 8 of diamonds, so no full house, and a flush is going to be 3 pairs this time. In the next one, the straddle is on, and there's 3 limpers before I look down at 10-9 offsuit in the cutoff. 99% of the time, I would just muck this, but this game was very passive, and I felt like playing some pots with these guys, so I flicked in the 10 bucks. The button did as well, and the small and big blind decided to also come along. Straddler checks it, so 8 ways here to a flop of king, queen, jack with 2 hearts. Alright, so we flopped the second nuts on a board where I would expect to get a lot of action, given that there's a bunch of cards with letters on them. Action checks to a middle position player who bets $80, the size of the pot, a pretty healthy bet, and not just that, but this guy in particular had been a very tight player so far. However, with the action on me now, I think I'm happy to just flat call and hopefully entice someone else to come along as well. The obvious downside to not putting in a raise here is we risk seeing some action-killing cards, such as a heart or perhaps a 10, but that's just a gamble I'm willing to take, so I put in the 80, and the button calls as well. 3 ways to a turn here, which I'm hoping is just a small innocent card, and luckily it is. It's the 3 of spades. Very happy to see that, and apparently the middle position player is as well, as he decides to continue betting, and quite sizable as well. $300, leaving himself only $150 behind. I take a look at how much the player on my left has, and it's about $500, so I elect to just shove all in, trying to commit both of these players, but unfortunately the guy on my left folds, but we do get a call from the middle position player. Obviously not surprising, seeing as he's put in like 80% of his stack already. Heads up to a river here, no more action to be had, which is the 5 of clubs. Another brick, only losing to ace 10 at this point, which my opponent does not have, as he flips over the queen jack of clubs. Pretty much a cooler. Not sure how instructive this hand is, but I'm happy to take it. In the next hand, the straddle is on, and I look down at ace-8 of spades from early position. I raise it up to $30 and get called by the button and the straddler. 3 ways to a flop of queen jack 8 with 1 spade. Straddler checks it, I decide to check it, and the player on the button checks as well. Turn card looks pretty good. It's the ace of clubs. Straddler checks it over to me once again, and for unknown reasons, I decide to check it. I guess I was hoping the player behind me would bet, maybe the straddler would call, and I could put in some fat check raise. Of course, that doesn't end up happening, so I feel like an idiot as we go 3 ways to a river, which is the 7 of diamonds. Straddler checks for a 3rd time. Now it's time to finally put some money in this pot and hope to get some action. So I throw in $50, and then suddenly the button decides 50 is not enough and kicks it up to 175. Straddler folds, and now the action's back on me. It seems like the strength of my hand is very under-repped, so I should be calling most of the time here. But on the other hand, the player on the button, I know you guys can't see him pictured here, but he looks like he hasn't bluffed since around 1992. Would he really be playing queen jack this way? Seems unlikely. Hands like 8-7 suited, same thing. He would probably just flat call. So I don't really think he's value raising with a worse hand, and I don't really think he's bluffing either. So as ridiculous as it sounds, I guess he's just got a hand like king 10 or maybe pocket 7s. So I think it over for a few seconds and decide to actually let it go. And then he does show me pocket 7s. So a little surprisingly, I end up making a good fold. And I gotta admit, I don't remember the last time I said that. It's around 11 p.m. and somehow it's still 88 degrees out here. Anyway, a couple of hands to report really quick because, as always, I missed filming them. In the first hand, the straddle is on. Action folds all the way to me. I'm in the big blind with queen 9 of hearts, I believe. I raise it up to 30 and the straddle makes the call. So heads up to a flop which came king high with a heart. I decided to bet and he made the call. Turn card was a jack of clubs, bringing in a backdoor club draw. I think it's a good card to size up on, seeing as I just have queen high, but I could have a lot of good hands on this board, so I decided to bet the size of the pot and my opponent makes the call. River is a miraculous 10. However, it does bring in the backdoor flush as it's the 10 of clubs. I decided to continue betting though, since, now I've got something. So I throw out 2/3 the size of the pot. I think it was around 150, I want to say. My opponent thinks for a while and eventually decides to raise, but he makes it the minimum, $300. Whatever, I'm not going to fold, especially for this size. So I make the call, and we're up against ace-queen offsuit. So kind of a cooler, but oh well, at least he only raised the minimum. In the next hand, we played a $25 bomb pot, which we're doing every dealer change. Flop came down ace high, and I was in the cutoff with a king high flush draw. Action checks to me, I decided to start bluffing now. The button makes the call, and I think the player in the big blind made the call as well. Turn card didn't really change anything, so when the action checked to me, I decided to just keep betting. Sized up a little bit this time to $200. Player on my left folds, and now the player in the blinds makes the call. So going heads up to a river in position, which brings absolutely no help. However, when he checks it to me for a 3rd time, I'm going to keep trying. Probably can't win if I check back king high. So I decided to bet pretty big. I put in $575, but he shows me jack 10 of clubs and lets it go. Overall, between those two hands, I think I lost like $100 or so. Anyway, got to get back to it. Let's go. All right, in this next hand, yours truly is in the straddle. Action folds all the way to the small blind who puts in the $10, and now the big blind raises to $30. He's probably the only other player at this table who's got a decent stack. I believe he's got maybe 1,500 or 2,000. So when I look down at ace-6 offsuit in the straddle, I elect to call, and now the small blind decides to make the call as well. So 3 ways here to a flop of jack, jack 4, rainbow. Small blind checks it, and the big blind puts in a continuation bet of $50. Now you might be thinking, it's just time to fold, I don't have absolutely anything, why is this hand even in the vlog? Well, here's my thought process. If he had a jack, he would very likely not be betting it on the flop, seeing as most players trap, especially at these stakes, and he's got a lot of money behind. So what I'm going to do here is just flat call, and eventually try to represent a jack or some sort of strong hand. try to get him off his hand on some later streets. There is a slight concern that the small blind actually could have a jack, given that he just checked to the razor on the flop, but I'm happy to see he gets out of the way. So heads up here in position with some evil plans in mind, going to a 3 of diamonds turn card. Once again, the big blind decides to bet $50, the same size as he did on the flop, and now it's time to spring this plan into action. So I raise it up to $200, and he pretty quickly makes the call. So at this point, I think he's got a pocket pair, maybe between 9s and kings, I'd imagine. So I'm probably going to have to bet fairly large on the river to get him to fold those hands, which was honestly part of the plan the second I decided to play this hand. So anyway, we're off to a river card, which is a pretty interesting one actually. It's the ace of spades. So we end up making top pair. And we have a question of whether or not we want to go for some value here. Even though I put him on a pocket pair, I don't really see him as the type to make a big call, especially with an ace out there now. So I decided to just check it back, expecting to have the best hand a good chunk of the time. But this is not one of those times, as my opponent flips over Jack 10 of spades. Pretty surprised to see that, since like I said, I think most players just slow play when they flop trips. And even though I lost the hand, I feel like I ran pretty good anyway, since if I hadn't rivered an ace, I would have probably blasted off. Moving right along to the next hand, in which the straddle is on, and I look down at pocket 10s in early position. I raise it up to $30, and only the big blind makes the call. Heads up in position to a flop of 6-5-3 rainbow. Big blind checks it over to me, I bet 50, and he makes the call. Turn card is the jack of spades. Once again, he checks it over to me, and even though it is a card bigger than my pocket pair, I don't really see how he would ever have a jack in this situation unless he floated the flop with like ace jack, for example. So I think it's still a card to try to get some value on. I throw out $120, and he thinks it over for a little while before deciding to call. So a decent sized pot here, and we're off to see one last card, which is the jack of diamonds. Once again, he checks it over to me, and I elect to continue betting for value here. I throw out $300, hoping my opponent puts me on a bluff since I have been fairly active so far. So I'd expect him to call me with pretty much any pair in this situation, which turns out he does. As he makes the call, I show it, and we're good. Who knows, maybe he didn't even have a pair. Could have had ace king or ace queen maybe. Either way, 10s are good, and we take down a nice pot. Now in the very next shuffle, the straddle is on, and yours truly puts on the $20 double straddle. Middle position is small blind limp, and I look down at 4-3 of diamonds. I decide to check it, and we go 3 ways to a flop of king 10-6 with 2 diamonds. So about the best situation you could ask for when you get to see a flop with 4 high. Small blind checks it, I decide to check it, and the player behind me now bets $30. Small blind makes the call, and I elect to call as well. Turn is the 3 of clubs. Small blind checks, once again I check it, and now the player behind decides to bet again, but interestingly enough, he bets the same size that he did on the flop, $30. Small blind now calls, and action's on me. Kind of an interesting situation because I would usually try to play this a little more aggressively, but at the same time, the bet is so small that if I call and end up not improving, it's still profitable just because it's such a small bet in relation to the pot. So I end up just flicking in the 30, hoping to see a diamond, which does indeed come. It's the deuce of diamonds, so we end up with the worst possible flush on this board, but hey, a flush is a flush, right? Small blind checks it for a third time, but this time I will not be checking. Seems very likely that the player behind will just be checking it back, so I bet $100, hoping to get called by a king. Player behind me doesn't really look like he's in the mood for any sort of hero calls though, and he just lets his hand go. A little surprisingly, however, the small blind now does decide to make the call. Not exactly what I anticipated. I expected him to fold, but the player behind me to call. Ended up getting the inverse, but either way, seems to work out as a 4 high flush is good, and we're going to take down this last pot of the night. At this point, I was feeling pretty spent, so I decided to rack up and go cash out. Hope you guys like those hands. It is now almost 1 in the morning and it's still 88 degrees. How is that even possible? Why isn't it getting colder? Anyway, about today's poker session. Unfortunately, I didn't play too long because I waited like 2 hours for a seat. By the time I got in, it was around 7 p.m. And so now 4 or 5 hours later, I'm getting pretty tired and had to call it a night. But still got a fair amount of interesting hands, I think. Played a total of 4.5 hours and won around $1,500. Still very content with that result. And even more so when you consider that that was win number 8 in a row for the month. The games in Texas this week are going to be pretty big, so it's nice to go into that with a little bit of momentum. But to be completely honest, I wouldn't be surprised if this win streak got snapped in half over there in Austin. But you're going to have to stay tuned and find out. So before I sign off for the night, I want to give you guys a quick recap of what to expect from next week. So on Wednesday, I'll be playing on their 1-3 live stream. On Friday, I will be hanging out at the lodge all day, not on the live stream, but just playing 5-5 or 5-10 if anyone wants to play that. Really no specific plans as to what stakes I'll be jumping into, but if you guys want to catch a session with me, that's the time and place to do it. And on Saturday, it's sort of the grand finale, as I'll be playing 5-10 on their live stream, which is uncapped, and that game should easily equate to perhaps a 10-25, maybe even a 20-40 when compared to Los Angeles or Las Vegas or really anywhere in the world, because man, those Texas guys are pretty crazy. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for the support. If you gave this video a thumbs up, I really appreciate it. And I'm really happy to see this group of subscribers continue to grow as the months go on. I'll see you all from Texas. Peace.